call to order the Commerce Committee. We do have a quorum. I will ask Representative Katiza-Wattoon, have you had a chance to review the minutes from January 18th?
Yes, Mr. Chair. I would move approval of the January 18th minutes.
Representative Katiza-Wattoon moves approval of the January 18th minutes. Any discussion to the motion? Seeing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion prevails and the minutes are adopted. The first bill on our agenda today is House File 30. Welcome back to the Commerce Committee, Representative Richardson. We miss you. This is your first biennium not on this committee, is that right?
That is correct, Mr. Chair.
That is our loss. I will move House File 30 be recommended to be re-referred to the Public Safety, Finance, and Policy Committee. Representative Richardson, to your bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. House File 30 is to address the skyrocketing catalytic converter thefts across the state. There's been a huge surge in recent years, and currently State Farm estimates rank Minnesota in the top 5 for insurance claims related to that theft. According to the National Insurance Crime Bureau, catalytic converters thefts rose by over 325% from 2019 to 2020. And behind that data, we know that there are real people who are impacted. Most of us know someone who has been impacted by catalytic converter theft, and some of us know people who have experienced multiple thefts. These thefts are hurting Minnesotans' pocketbooks as the replacement costs can exceed $2,000 or result in a total loss to the vehicle. A recent case in Otter Tail County illustrates the importance of this bill, where a 34-year-old man was arrested in connection with thefts of more than 150 catalytic converters. Court documents say that the man would go to the same scrap dealer each week to sell 2 to 3 catalytic converters. And court documents also went on to say that when confronted by law enforcement, he admitted to stealing more than 155 converters and had been paid more than $40,000. Minnesota was also among 9 states involved in a recent takedown of what the U.S. Department of Justice called a national catalytic converter theft ring. An estimated $38 million worth of stolen converters were shipped to a New Jersey shop, which extracted the precious metal powders from the equipment and sold it to a metal refinery for more than $545 million. The DOJ released notes it received assistance from not only the cities of St. Paul, Bloomington, Eagan, Chaska, Roseville, and Plymouth police departments, but also received assistance from sheriffs in Anoka, Brown, Carver, and other counties as well, showing the extensive reach of this crime ring. With criminal enterprises and conspiracies of this scale, it's no surprise that Minnesotans are calling on us to do more to prevent this theft, and this bill would make it harder to be unjustly enriched by catalytic converter theft. It would allow only scrap metal dealers to purchase detached catalytic converters. It would amend the information that dealers must record to include an identification number to the vehicle from which it was removed in order to be able to identify correct ownership, and also to identify the dealer's employee conducting the purchase. It requires document retention requirements for dealers and training for staff on requirements. Marking of detached converters would be required with either a VIN number or one from the alternative marking program, and also it would allow audits of dealers' records. It would prohibit the removal of converters from the dealer's premises for 7 days and prohibit payments for 5 days, and also would establish a converter possessed in violation of state law would be contraband that must be forfeited upon a conviction. With that, Mr. Chair, I would like to yield my time to the author testifiers.
Thank you, Representative Richardson. I do see that we have a couple testifiers here. I have Brian Sturgeon, the Chief of Police in West St. Paul, as well as Jeff Tate, the Chief of Police for Shakopee. Chief Sturgeon, if you wanted to make your way down, and you could state your name for the record and proceed to your testimony. Welcome to the committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My name is Brian Sturgeon. I'm Chief of Police for the City of West St. Paul, and thank you for Representative Richardson for inviting me to testify on behalf of the citizens of West St. Paul on this very important topic. The City of West St. Paul is only 5 square miles with a population of about 21,000 and growing because of redevelopment. We are not unlike any other city in the state of Minnesota or the nation as it relates to problems associated with catalytic converter thefts. This is a problem seen throughout the state and like I said, our nation. 2017, we had 12 thefts. 2018, 4. 2019, 0. 2020, 45. 2021, 177. 2022, similar numbers. These thefts occur on our residential streets, in driveways of homes, school parking lots, and in the lots of businesses. It affects our residents and visitors to the city. We have residents that have been victimized more than once, sometimes 2 or 3 times. The single mother working with 2 school-age children that twice in 1 month had her catalytic converter stolen from her vehicle while parked in her apartment parking lot. Teachers and students have had converters stolen from their vehicles while parked in the school parking lot. Older residents who depend on their vehicles to get them to doctor's appointments, but have to reschedule because thieves took 2 minutes to steal a catalytic converter from their vehicle while parked in the driveway or in front of their home. We have a wide range of residents that fit into different socioeconomic classes that depend on their vehicle to get to work, transport their children to and from school and school activities, and to arrive at important appointments to address their health needs. Without a catalytic converter, our residents' ability to drive their vehicles create a huge burdensome and undue stress. In the early 2000s to mid-2000s, I was a supervisor at the Dakota County Drug Task Force, and just like everyone in the nation and the state of Minnesota, we saw a huge problem with clandestine lab manufacturing. From one-pot methods to larger-scale lab operations. It was a social and environmental problem until the legislature did something, regulating the precursor of pseudoephedrine. We very seldom see these labs anymore. This problem was addressed legislatively. We need a similar approach to address catalytic converter thefts. Regulations and restrictions on the sale of these converters, and this proposed bill will do just that. Law enforcement, we cannot arrest our way out of this problem. We need legislative action. When this bill failed to move forward last year, the city of West St. Paul did their part in passing an ordinance that regulated the possession of catalytic converters. We don't have scrap yards in our city, but if we did, I can tell you that we had the support to pass language that's similar in this bill. Our city did what we could do to address this issue, and I'm asking you to support this bill and ensure it gets passed to help us combat this problem. And again, we cannot arrest our way out of this issue. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief. We also have Chief Tate. You make your way down, state your name for the record, and proceed to your testimony. Welcome to the committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members. My name is Jeff Tate. I am the current police chief for the city of Shakopee and a current director on the Minnesota Chiefs of Police Association Board, where we represent over 300 chiefs throughout the state. The Minnesota Chiefs of Police Association and the Minnesota Sheriff's Association are proud to support House File 30. It does not matter what city you work for, Metro or Greater Minnesota. The theft of catalytic converters in recent years has been substantial and had a significant impact on our crime rates, not to mention the workloads of police departments throughout Minnesota. It's impacted school bus operations in Rochester and just about any U-Haul rental establishment you can find. It's hard to find someone now who doesn't know of someone who's been impacted by catalytic converter thefts. It also leaves victims with hefty repair bills costing thousands. Unfortunately, these thefts are very hard to solve as it's very difficult to determine what specific vehicle the detached converter came off of. Other states have recently passed similar legislation. With no state law addressing this issue, cities like Shakopee have been forced to adopt ordinances prohibiting the possession of detached catalytic converters. We also hold several events throughout the year to label and uniquely mark catalytic converters for the public. These events have been popular, and we've been able to use our ordinance and cite individuals in possession a handful of times in the last year. That said, in 2022, despite trying to be as proactive as we could, Shakopee had 73 converter thefts, costing victims well over $100,000. Every city has a similar story. Some have enacted ordinances, but there is no uniformity, and it's time for Minnesota to join other states and pass a law to slow this trend down. This proposed legislation makes sense. While there are additional burdens on places that purchase catalytic converters, we must remember that the only reason they are being stolen right now is for quick cash. Those buying these devices have a responsibility and an obligation to make sure they are not part of this enormous problem moving forward. We've had several victims in our city who have driven older vehicles and have had to, because of insurance, had to make a choice between next month's rent or fixing their car. It's time for this legislation. I thank you for your time today. And again, the Minnesota Chiefs of Police Association and the Minnesota Sheriff's Association support House File 30. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief Tate. Appreciate you coming in today, you and Chief Sturgeon, and the work you do. We'll now move to public testimony. We did have one member of the public sign up to testify in advance. It's Jeremy Stephenson. Mr. Stephenson, you'd make your way forward, say your name for the record, and proceed to your testimony.
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, Representative Richardson, thank you. My name is Jeremy Stephenson. I work for the law firm Taft. Taft Advisors is the government affairs division. We represent the Institute of Scrap Recycling Industries, or ISRI if I refer to that later. These are the folks who in your communities take your old consumer goods and turn them back into supply stream bits and pieces of aluminum and steel and plastic and rubber and so forth. They provide a vital service because in a typical automobile you might buy, and I don't know the statistics on every single thing you might buy, but on a typical automobile, north of 50% of the materials are now recycled, as opposed to coming out of the ground. Same is true for catalytic converters. And I want to spend just a second talking about what a catalytic converter is, what the metals are, where they come from, and so forth, and what the alternative to recycling is. Not that we assume this bill is talking about any alternatives for recycling, but my testimony is going to aim to strike a balance between not slowing recycling down and doing things to meaningfully address crime that has had real impact on a lot of people in Minnesota and across the country. So a catalytic converter is an exhaust after treatment device that has typically 3 types of metal in it: platinum, palladium, and rhodium. They're all in the platinum family of metals. These are all things that I know that much about, but just enough to talk about it. And most of that material comes from South Africa and Russia. It makes for a really volatile marketplace. In North America has a little bit of mining of those materials. There are actually rich stores of those materials, but for the most part, we import, and the catalytic converters, for the most part, are made overseas and imported as complete units here. All that being said, the situation that we have in front of us is, as you heard law enforcement saying, they don't necessarily have the tools that they need to prosecute the folks who might have 1 or 2 of these things in their possession. And in the process of, I'll walk through what a typical catalytic converter theft to final destination looks like, at least from the experience our members have, in a couple of minutes. But 30 million of these things are recycled legally every single year, and that makes up about 25%. In 2019, it makes up about 25% of the substrate, the material that actually fixes the carbon monoxide and reduces the nitrogen oxide, the pollutants that these things are designed to abate as they come through the exhaust system. For each unit that's not made with recycled materials, 400 pounds of ore needs to be taken out of what amount to strip mines. And so our objective is to make sure that these things keep getting recycled appropriately. Keyword, appropriately and legally. And in quick note, Chair Stephenson actually put this in my head, and so I had to do a little looking. There are tremendously smart people that are doing all sorts of things to look at the next generation of catalytic converters. Not saying this problem is going to go away, but between the evolution of electric vehicles, which don't have exhaust, and something about the atmosphere of Venus and the way some chemical there is oxidizing things, the future of catalytic converters could have less of these metals, but nonetheless, the problem exists right now, and it probably will for the next few years. A typical scrap sale, a bit of foreshadowing, involves anybody, if Representative Doubt is going to bring in an old refrigerator and a bunch of old wire from a farm, he's going to drive into the scrapyard, and because of legislation that we worked with other stakeholders to pass in 2012, I believe, became law in 2013, He'll drive in, his license plate will be captured. Then he'll walk in, his face will be captured, all by HD video. This is all per statute. Then he'll go in, he'll place his materials on the weigh scale, a picture of that will be taken, his license plate or his government-issued ID will be photocopied and retained. He'll sign an affidavit that says this material is mine and I can sell it, and then he'll be paid with a trackable transaction. All of these things were done in the wake of the copper theft rash that went on 10, 12 years ago after the housing downturn. And the reason I bring it up is because that was a time when industry was witnessing a problem, law enforcement was living it every day, and poor people out there were having their materials stolen. And so Attorney Choi, Ramsey County Attorney Choi, brought this stakeholder together, and we hashed it out. And we figured out something meaningful that could be done to provide both prosecutors and law enforcement the tools and the records that they needed to address some of these concerns. Now, was it perfect? No, it's not perfect, but it's it was what we thought a really good start looked like for perhaps this discussion. One of the officers mentioned the 2020 pilot project. That was something that Sheriff Stephenson and his staff worked to help get done a few years ago. And House File 30 does something that we think is important, which is adds penalties. It adds very real penalties to the folks who are cutting these things off. And we've heard law enforcement, or at least I've heard law enforcement ask over the years that they need a specific tool to go after these folks, and we appreciate what you've done in the bill to start addressing that. But this is an evolving crime, and there's a lot of money involved in this crime. I believe one of the officers mentioned a crime ring that was busted in November. The way that that went down is very different than the way catalytic converters were being stolen and monetized 6 or 7 years ago. 6 or 7 years ago, typically, someone who was down on their luck for whatever reason would steal one of these things. Market prices weren't quite that high at the time, and they might bring it to a local scrap dealer. Keep in mind, every one of them would have their license plate taken, their face, all the things that I mentioned in the hypothetical doubt transaction would happen. And some of those people were busted.
Mr. Estenson, if I can ask you, I'll give you about a minute to wrap up here.
Can do. These days, what we're looking at is primarily interstate collection and distribution, very organized crime. And you can read about the bust in November, but it was very organized crime. In fact, I just did a Google search, or I'm sorry, a Facebook Marketplace search, and you can still find these folks. Interestingly enough, they'll be happy to answer your questions about how to get cash for your catalytic converter. All you have to do is meet them in Sioux Falls, South Dakota, Hudson, Wisconsin, so on and so forth. Also, Senator Klobuchar has found bipartisan support now with her bill in this Congress, as well as industry support. Our hope, Representative Richardson, you have our commitment to work with you and other stakeholders, if possible, to make sure we're doing things that meaningfully address the problem, do not cool down the recycling of these materials, and at the same time don't duplicate or go a different direction than what we think federal regulations for an interstate, for what has become interstate crime might be.
Thank you, Mr. Estenson. We'll now see if there's any other members of the public wishing to testify, any members of the public wishing to testify. Seeing none, we'll move on to amendments. There was one amendment offered. Representative Driscoll, I understand you have the DE1 amendment. Would you like to offer that amendment?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to offer the DE1 amendment for consideration today. And folks, the purpose for offering the D1, the DE1 today is we have been working as a legislature for a number of years, and Representative Richardson, I'm not sure, was this the third year we've been working on this perhaps, Mr. Chair?
At least.
Yeah. And the challenge that we continue to have is there's different interest groups, there's different issues that are popping up as we move along with this. And my reason for offering the DE1 amendment is it's an alternative to what we see here today. Is it a perfect alternative? Absolutely not, but it is an alternative to what we're seeing right now. And so one of our members had a group of people who came to her and said, hey, you know, Representative Bennett, here are some things that we have some concerns about. And so she formulated that into a bill. And I actually like the idea of what Mr. Stephenson is talking about, is having a working group on this so that we can get to an end game on this. And the feds are also realizing that because of, particularly in the state of Minnesota, Moorhead, Fargo, those markets are pretty close, different laws. You're just kind of reshifting where that crime is going to take place. St. Paul and Hudson, same idea, right, on the eastern part. Duluth and Superior. So you've got it existing in all different parts or corners of the state. And if we want to get this done and get it right, I don't know that we need to make the decision right here, right now. It is something we need to look at. But I would like to, again, I'm not going to ask us to vote on it. As a matter of fact, I'm going to withdraw the DE1 amendment at this point. I wanted to bring it forward for the purpose of discussion, that maybe what we need is a working group of people who have been around this and would be able to bring a solution that can have bipartisan support and bicameral support to get to the end game. We're waiting to see for a national registry or what Congress wants to do with this, because all we do, again, is shift some of that criminal burden to other areas. It doesn't solve the problem. I also fear that if we don't get this right, that some of the players who are involved in this industry may just say, you know what, we're not buying used catalytic converters anymore. And so that means that those things will end up in our county ditches, those will end up in other waste areas, and could be deemed as hazardous waste. And that has a cost to our society and to our way of life as well. So I stand committed. I've had friends and family who have been victims of this crime and want to find a solution. And I think putting people in a working group to go beyond what we can do in a short period of time with a committee would be helpful. So that is my thoughts, Mr. Chair. Again, I am going to withdraw the DE1 amendment, but wanted to use that as the tool in which to talk about other ideas that we have and a way to approach this very, very serious issue. And in wrapping, I want to thank Representative Richardson for sticking with this, because it is an issue that we face, as was pointed out by the chiefs, for multiple victims at different times. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Representative O'Driscoll. I don't have any other amendments, so we'll move to member discussion and questions. Representative Dowd, I think you had a question for Mr. Stephenson, so you might want to come back. I don't know if you're going to ask him about how he knows so much about your scrapping history and how he's monitoring you in particular. I'm interested in that, so, you know.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think it was just a hypothetical. I have no scrapping history, although I'm very intrigued now. Mr. Stephenson, I'm just interested in, there is a problem here, right? We all know it. I feel like this is something that shouldn't be all that difficult for us to fix as a legislature, and frankly, I'm at a stage in my life where I'm looking for solutions to solve problems, and I think that's a noble task for legislators. What is it about this bill that do you support this, not support this? Specifically, in practice, what are the problems with this? Just help me figure that out.
Mr. Stephenson.
Mr. Chair, Representative Doubt, there are components of the bill we support, components we don't support. I'd be happy to go into detail now if you'd like, or if it would be more appropriate, I can go over those with you in committee. The things that we don't like are old topics, tag and hold, some of the things that make conducting a commodities business difficult. And so, again, Mr. Chair, I'll defer to you as to whether or not I should go into detail.
Well, I think, Representative Dowd, if you have specific questions you want to ask, I don't know that we need to.
I'm just interested, thank you, Mr. Chairman and Mr. Stephenson. I'm just interested, if this is not a bill that you support in its current format, what in this bill is it that you don't support? What is it that, in practicality, as a scrapper is receiving this product, what is it that's onerous? I'm just trying to sift through what the problem is.
So perhaps, Mr. Stephenson, if you could identify some specific, in addition to the tag and hold, some specific provisions that you object to.
Yes, sir. So in Section 8, there are a couple of items, I'll just refer to my notes here, that have created problems. We've seen them in other states. One of the issues that we think the federal bill might resolve, and let me take one step back. Representative Richardson, it's our intent to work with you to get something done this year, not, this is in no way, or you should not construe my comments to mean that we're trying to delay into some subsequent year. We agree with you. This is a real problem. And frankly, from a business perspective, we don't want them to go other places. We want to recycle them because there's money to be made in the recycling process. There's always industry concerns about multiple databases. There is reference to database security, with proprietary information, customer relationships, so on and so forth. Those are always issues. Delayed pay, in addition to tag and hold, is a problem because when we agree to buy something or take it, we might shake on a certain price. And I'll give you a real example. Russia decided to stop selling platinum and its derivatives for a period of time, and the price of those things went up by like 40% over the course of a week. Penalties for industry. We obviously want to be making sure that industry members are playing by the rules, but creating new sets of felonies and so forth for industry players may make sense in certain situations. However, we want to remind the committee that already a bad actor in your community can have their license revoked. And to build on that one step further, one of the biggest issues we see right now is that someone gets themselves licensed as a scrap dealer and operates out of a pickup truck. Those are the folks who, in that November bust that spanned 8 states, we saw taking the letter of the law but not applying the spirit of the law. Our hope is that maybe brick and mortar.
Representative Dowd, any follow-up?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This doesn't seem like it should be a difficult process or problem to solve. I feel like the process you described in the hypothetical situation where I was bringing in my refrigerator and my wire from the farm, that you were going to capture my image, you were going to capture my driver's license, it seemed like that would solve this problem. I guess I'm failing to see, I see the difference between the two bills is not a lot. The penalties, obviously, I don't blame you for objecting to those. I think the penalty should be on the person that is committing the crime here. And I don't think we should make a crime out of a business that has no knowledge of whether that product was stolen or not. Both bills, the amendment and the bill, both suggest that you have to have the date it was removed from the vehicle and the VIN number or another identifying number on the vehicle. That seems reasonable. If we're also attaching the person who bought the person who sold it to the scrapyard, which you were doing in that hypothetical situation, seems like that would wrap it up. I guess, am I failing to see something here?
Well, Representative Dowd, I think a lot of the measures that you're talking about, I think all of them, are things that scrapyards already do. And we have because of Minnesota law that's been in place for a decade plus now. And yet this problem persists. So I think that the nature of Representative Richardson's bill, and I would certainly turn it over to Representative Richardson to comment further, is that given the scale of the problem that we're experiencing in my hometown, Coon Rapids, the Coon Rapids Police Department says this summer they're getting 1 report a day of a stolen catalytic converter. The measures that you're describing aren't enough to solve the problem. I don't know if Representative Richardson has anything to add to that. Richardson has anything to add.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And, just to build on that, I would wholeheartedly agree. I think this recent case in Otter Tail County where we got up to 155 catalytic converters being stolen before there was, confrontation by law enforcement. And this was a person who was showing up 2 to 3 times a week to the exact same dealer. And I think, especially in light of this most recent takedown that included 9 states, we're talking about an enterprise that brought in more than $545 million. And so there are definitely bad actors on the dealer side as well. And so I think it's important that when we're talking about penalties for the individuals who are cutting these off, that we're also talking about penalties for bad actors that are helping to hold up these very massive crime rings as well.
Thank you, Representative Richardson. Any further discussion? Representative Driscoll.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a quick question to Representative Richardson. Any comments or thoughts on my suggestion?
Representative Richardson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Representative O'Driscoll, for bringing forward the amendment. Would look forward to talking to you around the penalties piece. I know the penalties piece was slightly different than what's in the current bill, and as this bill is going to public safety next, very open to having conversations around that as well. As it relates to the restitution piece, I know that state statute already requires that restitution be available for victims of crime after an offender is either convicted or is found to be delinquent. But if there's sort of this idea around kind of the belt and suspenders approach around restitution, happy to talk through that with you as well. And in terms of the scope and the impact on dealers, I'm happy to continue to have conversations around that as well. But I just don't want to lose sight of the fact that there are, in fact, large-scale criminal enterprises that are going on, and I think it's important that that's part of the conversation as well.
Representative Driscoll.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I'll stipulate that as well. I think that that's important to look at. I guess the piece that I was wondering is, I'm on Commerce and raising those issues, and the conversation really is probably with Representative Bennett, who has an interest in this, and with folks like Mr. Stephenson, who are in the industry. I'm just trying to be a catalyst in the catalytic converter world here to try to be able to move it to an acceptable level for all players. Thank you, Mr.
The
Chair.
committee makes official note of your joke and grounds. I don't, Representative Richardson.
And just one thing that I would just add as well in terms of the work group piece that you have that you brought up as well. There have been several work groups around this, including an international association on auto theft investigators. So there's a lot of information out there right now with stakeholders at all levels. And there's also a resolution 2021-2 that I think really encapsulates what that work group has identified in terms of ways to really move forward, which are represented in this bill.
Thank you. Chair Cleavorn.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and to Representative Richardson. I really appreciate your tenacity and your sticking with this bill through the different sessions that you have been working on it. You know, one of the things that we never talk about is how much the cities who are taking, I mean, we just heard Coon Rapids, 1 report a day. This is a tremendous cost to each of our local communities. Do we have any idea as to what that unfunded cost is to our communities?
Representative Richardson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Representative Cleavorn, for the questions. I mean, there is some data that is out there that insurance companies have sort of pulled together in terms of the costs, and thinking of that from the perspective of victims who are having that information stolen. But I think that's a better question for department by department, what they're seeing like within their communities and how that's impacting their bottom lines.
Chair Stephen.
Chair Cleavorn.
And I appreciate that. I mean, the cost to the family is catastrophic, right? But it's just, I think about what the crime costs are, and maybe it's something I can better ask or find out later. And I'll check with my own city, Plymouth, which was involved in this operation as well. But thank you so much for the great work that you're doing.
Any further discussion? Seeing none, I'll turn it over to Representative Richardson for a final word. Before I do that, I'll just say thank you for, I agree with what Chair Cleavorn said, that your determination on this issue is really well appreciated, not just by the committee, but by Minnesotans. When we did the marking pilot project a couple years ago, those just flew out of police departments across the state. There is a high level of interest in this, and people are appreciating the work you're doing. So thank you for that. Representative Richardson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for prioritizing bringing this bill back early within the session. Looking forward to further conversations as the bill makes its path. Thank you for the opportunity, and thank you to the testifiers as well.
All right, and with that, I'll renew my motion that House File 30 be recommended to be re-referred to the Public Safety, Finance, and Policy Committee. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The motion prevails, and the bill is recommended to be recommended to be referred to the Committee on Public Safety and Finance and Policy. And now I will hand the gavel over to Representative Tizovic.
Great. Members, next on the agenda is House File 17. I will wait for the chair to get to the testifiers table, but before he moves his bill. Do I have to? I'm going to move chairs. Chair Stephenson, would you like to move your bill?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would move House File 17 be recommended to be referred to the Judiciary, Finance, and Civil Law Committee.
Very good. Chair Stephenson moves that House File 17 be recommended to be re-referred to the Judiciary, Finance, and Civil Law Committee. Chair Stephenson, to your bill.
Don't I have the amendment? Yeah, I have the A1 amendment, Madam Chair, if I could offer that at this time.
Very good.
I'll move the A1-1, which is an author's amendment that gets the bill in the shape I'd like the committee to consider it.
Cool. Members, any questions about the A1-1 that the bill gets the bill in the shape the author would like?
Madam Chair.
Representative New Brindley.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And Chair Stephenson, would you mind just quickly running through what the A1 amendment does?
Chair Stephenson.
Thank you, Madam Chair, Representative New Brindley. It makes a number of technical changes. There are some substantive changes in as well. As I'm looking at the A1, you can see that starting on lines 1.5, it changes the composition of the Prescription Drug Affordability Board to one that consists of members appointed by the governor, removing the legislator members from the voting capacity. That's in response, as I recall, to some court cases about whether legislators should be voting board members on an administrative panel. There's some discussions about some of the thresholds that trigger that trigger some of the actions in the bill that have been the result of stakeholder conversations and looking at what's been effective in other states. There is discussion of some of the different factors that are being considered, again, kind of reflective of what we've seen in some other states. I should add that this is a bill, it's actually two bills that are now one bill, but both of the predicate bills have been around for several years and have passed the House as separate measures in previous years and have been considered and implemented in other states. So there's things that we have learned both from the legislative process in prior years in this state and by looking at the experience of other states that inform some of the decision-making that's been going on there. Beyond that, I don't know if you have specific questions about what you're seeing in here, but that's kind of a general overview.
Representative New Brindley.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And thank you, Representative Stephenson, for running through that. And I had actually noted the makeup of the board as I was running through the bill. And just for clarification, so your understanding of your underlying language would say that the member appointed by the majority leader, the minority leader, the speaker, and the minority leader of the House, that those would actually be members of the legislature in the underlying, it's not clear. I would have assumed it was actually a community appointee appointed by those legislative leaders. So you have just removed those entirely as voting members.
Chair Stephenson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Representative New Brindley. Yeah, I think that I see the ambiguity in the language that you just in the old language that you just pointed out, and I think that the new language clarifies that we're not having members on because it's problematic to have voting members of the legislature on an administrative board like this.
Representative New Brindley.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
All right. Members, any further question to the A1-1 to get the bill in the shape the author would like? In that case, all those in favor, please say aye.
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 Any opposed, say no. All right, Mr. Chair, to your bill as amended.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. This bill relates to the high and soaringly increasing cost of prescription drugs across Minnesota and, in fact, the country. I know that a lot of members spent a lot of time in the last few months talking to their constituents in their districts at their doors or over the phone. And so I'm sure all of us, if we stop for even a second, can think about one conversation that we had with at least one member of our legislative district's community who is struggling with the cost of prescription drugs, which are just frankly out of control. It's one of the most common things that I recall hearing on the campaign trail, stories that tear at your heartstrings about parents doing whatever it takes to make sure that their kids have the drugs that they need to live, about older people choosing between their drugs and their mortgage, of splitting medication, of rationing medication. And at the same time, what we see consistently in the newspaper are stories of prices that are soaring and fueling out of control compensation for executives at large pharmaceutical companies when we think about things like the cost of the EpiPen going up 400% overnight to fund a 600% increase in the salary of in the compensation, excuse me, of the CEO of that company. I wish that was an isolated incident, what happened with the EpiPen. I wish that it was just one instance of what is unquestionably price gouging, but it is not. The problem of prescription drugs and the cost that it's creating for our community is a complex one. And there isn't one bill or one solution to that problem, and this bill isn't the solution to the problem. When I had part of this bill last year, what I like to say is that we didn't need a silver bullet, we needed silver buckshot. We needed a lot of solutions. This is one of them. This is one piece, really two pieces of the puzzle. This bill would give the Attorney General expanded authority to investigate and take action against price gouging of certain prescription drugs. Unfortunately, due to some federal case law, we're limited to generic drugs for this proportion of the bill, and that was the case last year when we considered, or 2 years ago when we considered the bill as well. I think a lot of people think of generics as the cheaper alternative, but it is, and that's often the case, but it's also the case that there's examples of price gouging in the generic marketplace. And I recall in previous years getting a list of some great examples during the testimony, so perhaps you'll hear that in a minute when we have people coming up and testifying. The other component of the bill sets up a prescription drug affordability board. This is a consumer protection agency. Just as we have a Public Utilities Commission, which provides consumers protection from their energy utilities and the monopolistic power that energy utilities have over consumers, a prescription drug affordability board can be a consumer protecting entity that treats the public, that recognizes the fact that pharmaceutical companies have monopolistic power over their consumers in many instances. If you need a drug to live, you don't have the power to bargain with the pharmaceutical company. Just like if you need electricity, you can't go across the street and go to a different merchant. And we should recognize that this is a different type of marketplace that consumers should have special protection within. So Madam Chair, that's maybe a 10,000-foot overview of the bill. I'm sure there's going to be a robust discussion. I also know there's a number of testifiers, so in the interest of time, I'll maybe let the testifiers go now.
Certainly. Thank you, Mr. Chair. First on the list of testifiers, we have Jason Plagencool, Assistant Attorney General. You can introduce yourself and proceed with your testimony.
Good afternoon. My name is Jason Plagencool. I am an Assistant Attorney General, and I'm the manager of the Consumer Wage and Antitrust Division of the Attorney General's office. Attorney General Ellison regrets that he cannot be here with you today, but he asked me to testify in his stead in order to voice his strong support of House File 17, which takes important steps to combat the high cost Minnesotans pay for prescription drugs that are consistent with recommendations made by the Attorney General's award-winning Drug Price Task Force report. In 2019, the Attorney General convened a task force to study the problem of the high cost of prescription drugs and to make recommendations to tackle this problem. The task force makeup was bipartisan and included experts on prescription drug pricing, patients and their family members, medical practitioners, as well as representatives from the Board of Pharmacy and the legislature. The task force met publicly and took testimony throughout 2019 and ultimately published a 93-page report that not only diagnosed the causes and contributors to high drug prices, but also made 14 recommendations to lower the cost of prescription drugs for Minnesotans. Both the executive summary and the full report are available on the landing page of the Attorney General's website, and I would encourage you to take a look at it. In 2020, the National Conference of State Legislatures conferred a notable document award on the report. 2 of the task force 14 recommendations are embodied in House File 17. The first is prohibiting drug manufacturers from imposing excessive price increases on drugs sold in Minnesota. The second is establishing a drug affordability board that can investigate cost increases of prescription drugs, publish reports on pricing trends, and when appropriate, allow the board to set a ceiling or cap on the amount paid to purchase drugs that create an affordability challenge to patients in Minnesota. If Minnesota enacts House File 17, it would be the 8th state in the country to establish such a board. House File 17 would help rein in the high costs of that are being paid for life-saving medications. And unfortunately, excessive price increases of both generic and branded prescription drugs continue to cause affordability challenges to Minnesotans. To name just a few examples that the enactment of House File 17 could help address. First, fluconazole, which is a generic drug, and this is an antifungal medication that 2 different generic manufacturers raised the list price of from $2 to $28 and $24 respectively, which constitutes a price increase of over 1,000%. Lisinopril would be example number 2. This is another generic drug, and this is a medication that's used to treat chronic heart failure and hypertension. A manufacturer raised the list price of this generic drug from $20 to $129, a 539% increase. Another example is Acthar, which is a branded prescription drug used to treat multiple conditions, including lupus and rheumatoid arthritis. This drug was originally approved in 2010 by the FDA. It was sold by Sanofi at a list price of $40 per vial initially, but after it was purchased by a subsequent manufacturer, the new owner now sells the drug for $39,784 per vial. These are by no means isolated examples. According to one federal Health and Human Services report, in January of 2022, the average price increase of existing prescription drugs was nearly $150 per drug. And in July 2022, it was on average $250 per drug. In 2022, according to the Health and Human Services report, several drugs increased their list prices by more than $20,000 or by more than 500%. Enacting House File 17 would go a long way to help Minnesota combat this problem. And the Attorney General's office has an important role to play under the bill. The Attorney General would have the authority to investigate and bring enforcement actions against prohibited excessive price increases of generic drugs. The Attorney General's office would also provide legal services to the board that's created.
Mr. Flagencool, I'll just ask you to wrap up.
Okay.
Thank you.
And the Attorney General also can bring enforcement actions to the extent an upper payment limit set by the board is violated. In sum, this bill is going to help Minnesotans afford their lives and live with dignity and respect. And so the Attorney General's office strongly supports enactment of the bill and would urge you to do so as well. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. Next, we have Mary Jo George. Please introduce yourself for the record and proceed with your testimony. Following, we have Bob Miller.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, members of the committee. My name is Mary Jo George, and I'm the Advocacy Director for AARP Minnesota. On behalf of AARP and a coalition of community, labor, small businesses, and farmers, we appreciate the opportunity to testify in support of House File 17, a bill to rein in the high costs of prescription drugs. We also want to thank Representative Stephenson for bringing this important bill forward. The high cost of drugs hurts everyone, not only those who rely on prescription drugs for their health, but all of us who are paying higher premiums and out-of-pocket costs, as well as taxpayers who are paying for our public programs. Americans have seen their prescription drug prices skyrocket, and they are sick and tired of paying the highest drug prices in the world for critically needed medication. About 30 years ago, the public was outraged over a drug that cost less than $10,000 per year, and we now have drugs approaching over $1 million per year. A recent report by the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services noted that list prices on more than 1,200 medication rose faster than inflation, rising on an average of 31.6%. So it's hardly surprising that we hear stories from Minnesotans facing serious health and financial consequences due to high prescription drug prices. And the reality is that we're often talking about costs that patients will face every year for the rest of their lives. As you've heard, under House File 17, the Affordability Board can review drug prices that pose a affordability challenge and set upper payment limits that apply throughout the healthcare system to not only protect consumers, but other stakeholders in the system as well. Also, price gouging will protect consumers from sudden and unreasonable spikes in generic prescription drug prices. Efforts like these will ensure that consumers can access and afford medications they need and could save billions of dollars for patients, taxpayers, and our healthcare system. So on behalf of our coalition and countless others, we urge you to pass this legislation. Thank you.
Thank you. Bob Miller, you can introduce yourself for the record and proceed with your testimony. Following, I have Linda Larson on the list.
Let me get my glasses on here so I can read what I
Not a problem.
want to talk to you about. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Bob Miller. I live in Prior Lake with my wife, Mary, and I'm here because I'm among the nearly 40% of the people living with multiple sclerosis who have altered the use of their medications due to cost. When I was diagnosed almost 20 years ago, it started out with just a tingling in my cheek. And then I got dizzy, and my speech was slur, and then I started having difficulty with one of my legs. At one point, it got so bad that I was slurring my speech and getting dizzy about every 15 minutes. Within a few months, I was prescribed beta-seron, a disease-modifying therapy that has been shown to modify the course of MS and prevent the accumulation of disability. Symptoms and prescription therapies vary widely for unpredictable MS, and beta-seron happened to work for me for 12 years. When introduced in 1993, beta-seron cost $11,500 a year. By 2020, its cost had risen to over $111,000 per year. Median cost for MS DMTs was $94,000 in 2022. And when generics are included into that figure, it's still $80,000. As I transitioned insurance carriers 7 years ago, I checked to see what my out-of-pocket costs would be. I was told I'd pay over $10,000 a year out of pocket, and I'm on a fixed income, and that amount jeopardizes my retirement security. When I stopped taking beta-seron, my doctors told me I was rolling the dice with my health. Luckily, I haven't had a relapse in those 7 years, but I don't know what the future holds. MS is quite unpredictable. I strongly feel that no one should have to make that kind of decision. Medications cannot improve lives of people if they can't afford to access to them. The National MS Society applauds HF 17's intent to bring more transparency, discussion, and attention to the high cost of prescription drugs for people with chronic conditions. We appreciate that the Prescription Drug Affordability Act sections of the bill utilize a multi-stakeholder approach in acknowledging the roles of health plans, employers, clinical researchers, drug manufacturers, patients, and others. People with chronic illnesses like MS need to know that they'll be able to get the life-changing medication they need when they need it. I urge your support for the Prescription Drug Affordability Act, and I thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Miller. Linda Larson, you're up next.
Go ahead.
Oh, Representative O'Driscoll.
Well, you were calling the next testifier. I'm just wondering how many testifiers we have because I did let the chair and the bill author know that we do have a number of questions we'd like to be able to pursue today.
Certainly. We have about 14 more minutes slotted for testimony. We have got 5 testifiers, and then we'll be able to move to discussion after
Thank you,
that.
Madam Chair.
Certainly. You can introduce yourself for the record and proceed with your testimony.
Madam Chair and members of this committee, my name is Linda Larson, for the record. I'm a third-generation, lifelong Minnesotan, and a farmer, grew up on a farm, and I'm a member of the Minnesota Farmers Union. Thank you for the opportunity to speak to you today. I'll be brief. I'm here to speak in support of House File 17, establishing a prescription drug affordability board, and finally putting a check on the price gouging of prescription drugs. During the height of the pandemic, I contracted bacterial bronchial pneumonia. It wasn't COVID. Because of the shutdowns, I was unable to make a doctor's appointment, so 2 trips to the emergency room and 6 video appointments over a 7-week period of time, each with a different person. Someone finally found a way to help. They said I should be hospitalized, but there were no available beds. Inhaler prescriptions opened my airways enough for me to be able to breathe without gasping for air. It took 2 more months, though, before I could even go up or down a stairway without stopping. The rest of the story is that my throat and lungs are permanently damaged due to the longevity of my illness, which you can probably hear in my voice. And I now have asthma. I need these 2 inhalers for the rest of my life due to my damaged pulmonary system, and I'm now at high risk for developing COPD and/or emphysema. 1 inhaler is a steroid. My copay at Costco Pharmacy for 3 of them was $411 last time I picked them up. That was my copay after insurance. The price goes up every time. If I were to purchase only 1 at a time, the copay is $289. Figure that out. $289 for 1, $411 for 3. It makes no sense, and the pharmacy couldn't explain it either. This exact same inhaler in Canada sells outright for $92 for 3 of them. The drug companies are getting away with such extreme pricing with little or no accountability or consequence, and through the continual consolidations that further reduce the competition, I'm really concerned about the future without intervention. The Prescription Drug Affordability Board is a common sense first step toward tackling the exorbitant price of prescription drugs. I urge you to pass House File 17. Thank you for your time.
Thank you for sharing your experience with us. Next, I have Judy Cook. Yep. We are going to try to stay to 2 minutes for our remaining testifiers so everybody gets a chance to share their thoughts. You can introduce yourself and proceed with your testimony.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. My name is Judy Cook on behalf of the Association for Accessible Medicines, representing the generic and biosimilar manufacturers. There's a letter from AAM in your packet that outlines their opposition to House File 17, as well as the benefits of generics and biosimilars, the segment of the prescription drug marketplace that is providing significant savings for consumers. The price gouging provisions in this bill do not address the cost drivers in the prescription drug marketplace, and a federal court has already found a similar law unconstitutional. But the fundamental question is, why are you targeting generic drugs? Generics are 91% of prescriptions filled, but only 18% of drug spending. Generics make up only 2% of all healthcare spending. And I'll talk about a couple of commerce-related provisions in the bill. This bill allows the state to sue a generic manufacturer if they increase the price of a drug $30. Yet it does not require a Minnesota consumer to have received that manufacturer's drug or paid that price. Just because one manufacturer increases the price, other manufacturers of the same generic drug likely will not, because it is a competitive marketplace. And that is true for some of the examples noted. Also, this section of the bill will do nothing about the cost of a brand drug that increases by thousands of dollars. Generic drugs are sold to wholesalers at a national level and usually outside of Minnesota. The wholesaler determines which generic manufacturer's products are sold to Minnesota pharmacies. In most instances, the manufacturer's portion of the transaction does not occur in the state. It does not make sense that every generic manufacturer must maintain a registered agent and office in the state when the subsequent sale is outside of their control. We are not familiar with any other product sold in Minnesota that has this requirement. Regarding the prohibition of withdrawal of generic drugs from the state and reporting requirements, again, it's the wholesaler who has control of where generic drugs are sold or not sold. So the manufacturer would not know if their product is being sold in Minnesota, unless, of course, they discontinue making the drug altogether, and this language does not contemplate that.
Thank you, Mrs. Cook. I'll just ask you to wrap up.
Oh, I am. Regarding the Drug Price Affordability Board, AAM's concerns are outlined in the bill. Thank you, and I'm happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, Bentley Graves, the Chamber of Commerce. You can introduce yourself and proceed with your testimony. Following, we have Peter Nelson.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members. My name is Bentley Graves. I'm with the Minnesota Chamber of Commerce. The Minnesota Chamber of Commerce, we represent 6,300 employers across the state and more than 500,000 employees. We work on healthcare issues because healthcare costs are a significant concern for our employer members and for their employees. And so not surprisingly, you would find significant agreement amongst our members about the goals of House File 17 to lower the cost of drugs and improve access to these life-saving drugs and therapies. Having said that, I'm here today to express some concerns with the approach of the bill. On behalf of our members who are private sector actors in the private market, we have significant concerns about the idea of a government commission setting the prices for privately produced goods in the private marketplace. While again there's significant overlap with the goals of the bill, there are concerns that extend beyond that, and you've heard from Ms. Cook, and I'm sure you hear from others from the industry as well about some of the unintended consequences that may flow to patients in Minnesota and the access to the drugs that they may or may not have. But I appreciate the opportunity to share these concerns. I appreciate the conversations we've had with the chair, and want to continue to work with him and members of the committee to find solutions that we can support. But unfortunately, House File 17 is an approach that we cannot today. Thank you for the opportunity to testify.
Thank you for your time. Peter Nelson, you're up next. You can state your name for the record and proceed with your testimony. Finally, we have Christina Moorhead after.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My name is Peter Nelson, and I'm a senior fellow with Center of the American Experiment. I believe the last time I was talking in this building was back in 2017. I was talking about reinsurance. In the meantime, I went to D.C. and worked for the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, where I led a lot of the agency efforts on regulations of insurance and insurance exchanges. In that role, I worked a lot. I led the efforts on price transparency for health plans. And obviously, prescription drug price transparency was part of that approach. And I guess my message here today is I believe that price controls in this bill are the wrong approach to addressing our drug pricing issues. Price transparency is where we should be focused. Drug price controls have some obvious and predictable negative consequences, like any government control over a price. They often lead to shortages, to lower quality, and to fewer new products. And the concern, of course, on this bill is that it's going to lead to fewer new drugs. Of course, price controls reduce the incentives for research in this industry, which leads to fewer new drugs. And I also want to mention that I believe that the focus here on drug pricing is misplaced, because when you look at the CMS data coming out on the national health expenditure front, it shows that drug pricing is actually one of the lowest growth areas of our healthcare spending. In fact, over the past 5 years, healthcare prices have dropped overall when you look at their price index. So when you look at that period of time, drug prices actually accounted for a $9 billion reduction in national health expenditure spending. By comparison, hospital prices accounted for over $140 billion in spending. So I do think the focus on drugs is misplaced. I think we should be focused on price transparency overall. That includes price transparency for drugs. That includes price transparency for hospitals. And if we bring hospital pricing and drug pricing out of the hidden realms that are so confusing and hard to understand. I think you'll bring out that competitive pressure that will eventually truly bring down pricing. And I appreciate your time.
Thank you, Mr. Nelson. Christina Moorhead, you can introduce yourself and proceed with your testimony. I do have one member of the public who has asked to speak after this as well.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the committee. My name is Christina Moorhead. I'm a Deputy Vice President of State Policy for the Pharmaceutical Research and Manufacturers of America, or PhRMA. We represent the country's leading innovative biopharmaceutical research companies that have invested nearly $1 trillion since 2000 in the search for new treatments and cures, including an estimated $102 billion in 2021 alone. PhRMA agrees that the policy changes are needed to lower patient out-of-pocket costs for medicines, but we believe that House File 17 is not the solution. Several other states have enacted prescription drug affordability boards with language similar to this bill since 2019, and none have lowered patient out-of-pocket costs. Maryland has spent nearly $2.5 million since 2019 on their prescription drug affordability board, and they've yet to set an upper payment limit for a single medicine. Maine's Prescription Drug Affordability Board has been active since their legislation passed in 2019, and they have not yet implemented a policy that has reduced patient out-of-pocket costs. New Hampshire's board has met a total of 16 times since 2020. They have not implemented a policy that has reduced patient out-of-pocket spending, and they are currently looking at 2 bills this session that would repeal their board. Additionally, Colorado is currently experiencing difficulties and delays in their attempts to establish an upper payment limit for a single prescription drug in their state. These states have spent significant time and resources investing in this policy, and it has failed to live up to the promises of regulating prescription drug prices and lowering patient out-of-pocket costs. In fact, if this legislation were to pass and if the state were to establish an upper payment limit for a prescription drug, there's no guarantee that a patient would pay the upper payment limit amount for a prescription drug as drafted in the bill. The bill appears to try to circumvent federal law and case law issues by regulating provider billing to bill no more than the upper payment limit. However, the amount a patient pays when they have health coverage is whatever the health plan designates as their cost. House File 17 does not attempt to regulate health plan coverage and reimbursement, which means there's no guarantee that patient out-of-pocket costs will change as a result of this legislation. However, we are in agreement that patients need help with their out-of-pocket costs for prescription drugs.
You could just wrap up, Ms. Moorhead. Thank you.
You'll see we gave to the committee a handout that has other policy options that other states have passed and are considering, including passing to rebates to patients at point of sale, and also looking at patient assistance and ensuring that applies to the deductible. Thank you.
Thank you for your time. We have Mark Hughes, a member of the public who has asked to speak. You can come up to the testifier table and introduce yourself and proceed with your testimony. Chair Stephenson.
Oh, yeah, I'm sorry.
Bring your own chair.
No, I'm sorry. I would have.
Members of the committee, Chair, thank you for this time. My name is Mark Hughes, and I'm just an old fossil that's been around here a long time. I don't want to hold this up or pass it along. This is a Walgreens club card that you can belong to if, for example, your insurance is locked at a date you can't get your prescription filled, then you can pay a discounted price on your prescription. My number one point today is that shouldn't be. We're a state of one for all and all for one. If you needed the prescription, they wouldn't give it to you if you didn't need it, so you got to buy it, so forth and so on. Number two is I have a disease called Barrett's esophagus. I'm not the only one in the state of Minnesota that has that. But when it first started, I was doing an upper GI, and then it was decided that my insurance changed and I needed to go on a generic drug. My body rejected the generic drug, and I needed the regular prescription as opposed to the generic to try to combat that. I couldn't get it because my insurance didn't cover it. So therefore, that was kind of a blockade. So I've had, and I'm very thankful, and I didn't give up my medical technology, and I'm having another procedure on 24th of February. But they haven't told me that's all we can do. I'm glad we can have it. However, I talked to my surgeon before the specialist I was sent to. I went back and got some more consultation. And she said that she's believed in her medical profession that if I would have been able to take the generic drug, I would have had half the procedures that I would have had. And so now I'm going under treatment number 30, and all I'm saying is, if I would have been given on my insurance the okay to take the regular prescription instead of a generic, I think I would have saved some money and some time. And I guess I just feel I'm going to support the bill, and I'm just one of 5 million people in the state of Minnesota. But thanks for listening, and I'm concerned about this issue. Thank you.
Thank you for your time and sharing your experience with us, and best of luck on your upcoming treatment. All right. We do have a few amendments today, members. Start with the A2. Representative Niska, would you like to move and describe the A2?
Thank you, Chair Katiza Watun and Representative Stephenson. The A2 is one of a number of concerns attempting to address a number of concerns I have with the remedy provision. And as I discussed with Representative Stephenson, it may be possible that I am willing to withdraw this amendment. And I'm interested in Mr. Plegan-Cool from the Attorney General's office, if he can help me just to clarify the way that the bill works, and in particular the pre-suit discovery that's provided on page 3, 28 and 29. My concern initially reading the bill is that this might allow pre-suit discovery with no legal threshold, but if I'm following kind of the ping-ponging between the different provisions, and maybe Mr. Plegan-Cool, if you could confirm this for the record, it's at least the Attorney General would need some sort of reasonable cause to believe that a violation has occurred before seeking pre-suit discovery, going to petition to the court for pre-suit discovery under the bill as it's written. Is that the case? I just want to clarify that for the record.
Mr. Plegan-Cool.
Madam Chair, Representative, yes, that is how I read the bill as well. The kind of above in subdivision 2B, right above the section you were seeking to amend, incorporates the standards in section 8.31, and that's the provision that requires reasonable grounds in order to engage in a pre-suit investigation. And so we would agree that that's incorporated in the bill already.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I have a number of other concerns that aren't related to this amendment, but I'll withdraw the amendment. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Niska. We will move on to the A3 amendment. Members, Representative Perryman, would you like to move the A3?
Yes, thank you, Chair, and thank you, Representative Stephenson. I move that Amendment A3 is proposed. This amendment reduces the length of the notice a manufacturer must give the state withdrawing a product from 180 days to 90 days.
Thank you, Representative Perryman. Chair Stephenson.
Yeah, Madam Chair, Representative Perryman, I would be, I was going to listen to the argument that you had for this amendment before making up my mind. So I don't know if you have more to offer about why you're offering this amendment, or could say more about it, because I don't know, with any number, there's nothing magic about 180 or 90 or whatever, but, I'd be interested to hear why 90 is preferable to 180 in this instance.
Representative Perryman.
Chair, thank you. Representative Stephenson. As a cancer survivor, I'm on many meds as I get to revivalship, I call it. And it's just because most of meds today are 90 days. They're 3-month supply, and then you have to renew it. In fact, if you look at my calendar, every 90 days, I am going back to get the renewal. So I'm just trying to match up the renewal of meds in real life with what you're asking for of the length of time for pulling out the meds.
Chair Stephenson.
Well, Madam Chair, Representative Perryman, tell you what, that makes sense. I tend to think that more notice might be better for people to know that what's going on and for the public, so I'm a little reticent. But this bill has a few more committee steps to go on, and I think we'll hear from people as it goes along. So what I'd be willing to do today is take the amendment, and then we'll see how the discussion continues, and maybe you and I can continue to talk about this particular issue, but I'd ask for a yes vote today.
Thank you, Representative.
Do you have a follow-up? I'm sorry.
No, I'd like to work on it just to make it ease and sensible of 6 months to 3 months, if we can do that.
Great.
Representative.
Thank you. I just wasn't sure who said representative, so I was looking down here. So members, any further discussion to the A3 amendment? Representative Liebling.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair, and I think the Chair Stevenson's being really, really generous. I guess I would ask Representative Perryman to continue working on it without making the change today. I'm going to oppose the change, and, you know, I think we can continue discussion on the bill, but having more notice is more in the interest of Minnesota consumers. And it's, you know, good that, you know, it's at least enough time for somebody who's on a drug to, you know, run through their refill or get a refill or whatever, but there might be issues going on like, you know, needing to figure out what the substitute drugs are or, you know, formularies being adjusted. So I don't really see why we would want to reduce this from 180 to 90. I think we need to, there needs to be a better case made for that before I would vote for it.
Members, any further discussion? Then all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
No.
The motion does prevail and the amendment is adopted. We have A4 amendment. Representative Dotseth, would you like to move to A4?
Thank you, Madam Chair, and Representative Stephenson. I'd like to propose Amendment A4, which requires this bill. Currently, the bill, first of all, I'd like to just say that the number of heartfelt testimonies today. I think we can all appreciate everyone that came here today. This amendment just basically requires that manufacturers have a registered agent or office in the state of Minnesota. The concern I have is what kind of price increase will this have on the prescription as we move forward and the cost of doing business here in Minnesota. Also, this cost shouldn't be included in the calculation of excessive price increases. This amendment also requires the cost to be considered when the AG makes that decision. I kindly ask for this amendment to be approved.
Chair Stephenson.
Well, thank you, Representative and members. I'm going to oppose the A4 amendment. I don't think that this is necessary, and I also kind of reject the premise of this bill being a contributor to the cost of prescription drug increases, so I'd ask for a no vote.
Representative Stevens, I just say that I would...
Representative Dotseth.
Oh, I'm sorry. Thank you, Madam Chair. I would still encourage a yes vote on this amendment, just to provide some comfort language. If it's already in part of the bill, I guess it would be no harm in including this in clarification as we move forward.
Chair Stephenson, anything further?
No, I think there is, Madam Chair, I disagree with both the premise of the amendment and its effect. I disagree with the premise that the cost of compliance is a significant driver with this bill is a significant driver of the cost of prescription drugs, and I disagree with what this amendment would do, so I'd ask for a no vote.
Representative New Brindley.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Representative Dotseth. You know, I was going to ask this after, but it's probably more appropriate now. And I'm just wondering, you know, Representative Stephenson, you seem quite convinced that this will not add cost, but I'm wondering, you know, I'm not sure that there is a good definition of having an agent within the state. Are there other manufacturers in the state that already have to have a registered agent?
Chair Stephenson.
You know, Madam Chair, Representative New, you're taking me all the way back to my civil procedure classes, and I don't know if Representative Niska is also having flashbacks at this moment to that. At this point, I think that there is are examples, and we could certainly talk offline, or we can look, or we could maybe even ask House Research about other industries where registry agents are common or required.
Representative New Brindley.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I actually think that's really important and pertinent to this amendment particularly. We should have an idea of what this means, what it's going to cost the manufacturers, because certainly the language in the bill is not just that they are required to have an agent within the state. That agent is required to office within the state. So we're talking about manufacturers who may not have a manufacturing facility in the state of Minnesota, but they are required to have this registered agent who offices within the state, and that is certainly going to add significant costs to the manufacturer. And so to think that we're going to increase the costs on the drug manufacturers and then hold them accountable for that cost seems a little out of alignment.
Chair Stephenson.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair, Representative New Brindley. You know, there's a whole industry around maintaining registered agents in order to establish grounds for receiving process and service and other things like that. The cost of doing this is not significant on the scale of prescription drugs in the state of Minnesota. This is a de minimis cost. I think it's not really going to be, when we're talking about the scale of price increases we are seeing in the prescription drug marketplace, the idea that the cost of establishing a registered agent in the state is a significant driver of that cost is just not accurate. And you could look into this, but it's very common to have registered agents across the state, and it's a de minimis cost.
Representative New Brindley.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And while I appreciate that, Representative Stephenson, you still haven't told us really what it's for in the state, and if we have other manufacturers who are required to do this. De minimis is in the eye of the beholder, I suppose. We also have not been told what it will cost and what would be the approximate cost of having a registered agent in the state. So I think there are a lot of outstanding questions on this, and I think it's reasonable to say that, we can't directly increase the cost to a manufacturer and then hold them accountable for that cost. It doesn't make sense. It's not logical.
Representative Doubt.
Thank you. Why are you requiring a registered agent, and what's the purpose of that? Why are you doing it?
Chair Stephenson.
Madam Chair, Representative Doubt, you need, as I alluded to with the civil procedure comment, you need to have a registered agent for an entity that doesn't have an office in Minnesota to be regulated, to have the service of process and other things like that.
Representative Doubt?
No.
Okay. Great. Members, any further questions or discussion to the A4 amendment? All right. Seeing none, all those in favor, please say aye.
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 All those opposed?
No.
The motion does not prevail, and the amendment is not adopted. We'll move on to discussion to the bill as a whole, as amended. Representative New Brindley.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Representative Stephenson. We heard one of the testifiers suggest that this is sort of a first step, but it's not a first step. A couple years ago, we passed the drug transparency bill that required a report, and the legislature should have seen a report in May of 2022. We also should have seen a report, is that just last week and a half ago, on January 15th. I know you are the chair of the Commerce Committee. I am the minority lead on the Human Services Finance Committee. Both of us should have received that report, and I'm wondering, have you received that report yet? I have not. I'm wondering if you have.
Chair Stephenson.
Madam Chair, Representative New Brindley, I receive a lot of emails every day, so I don't want to say authoritatively I have not, but I can't recall laying my eyes upon it. While I have the microphone, I just want to say that someone in our amazing audience has answered your question about the cost of having a registered agent in Minnesota by doing some Google research. And you can have a registered agent in Minnesota for $49. So I again will repeat that I do not believe that is a significant driver of the cost of prescription drugs in Minnesota.
Representative New Brindley.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm not sure that our pharmaceutical manufacturers are going to want to find their registered agent off of LegalZoom, but you never know. It's possible that they could get one for $49, but somehow I am a skeptic. You'll forgive me for being a skeptic on that. I've got a real question on the generic and off-patent drugs. As one of our testifiers testified that generics account for 91% of the drugs in the state and 18% of the cost. I mean, these are clearly not the significant drivers. And I'm wondering why you're not including brand drugs. Why are you not including patented drugs in this bill on price gouging? I mean, the way I read this, theoretically, a generic drug could increase in price by $30, and they're going to be charged with price gouging, depending on the other factors involved, whereas a brand drug could increase $1,000, and there's no consequence. So I'm wondering why that portion of this bill is exclusive to generic drugs.
Chair Stephenson.
Madam Chair, Representative New Brindley, as I mentioned in my opening statement, we had to restrict it to generic drugs due to some federal court decisions. The initial version of this bill, as it existed several sessions ago, did include brand names, but we had to pull them out as a result of some litigation in another state.
Representative Brindley.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I'm wondering, Representative Stephenson, I have heard this before, but I've never had laid eyes on it. Do you have a copy of those court decisions that we can review?
Chair Stephenson.
Madam Chair, Representative Brindley, I'm sure that we can get you a copy of that. I don't have them in my physical possession right here in the room, but I'm sure we can get you a copy
Or direct us,
of the court decisions.
send us in the right direction.
Representative New Brindley.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I will skip the registered agent questions. We've gone there. I would address quickly, we talked about the board, that you changed the makeup of this PDAP in your A1 amendment. And I would just point out, I'm really concerned about the changes that you just made, actually. I think a more logical change would have just been to clarify that that board member may not be a member of the legislature. I think that could have been appropriate. But the way you have changed this is now, it's made up of 7 members who are voting members appointed by the governor, 1 non-voting member by the majority leader of the Senate, 1 non-voting member by the Speaker of the House. And these all need to be appointed by January 1st of 2024. And so I would just point out that this makes this board a 100% partisan board. And I think that's problematic. I mean, if you went back to the previous version, we're talking about, 2 minority members that might offer a different perspective, but I think it is really problematic to have a board makeup that is 100% partisan. I just don't think that that's good for Minnesota. I think that should be reconsidered moving forward, and I apologize for not taking a closer look at that amendment prior to being here so I could offer an amendment to the amendment.
Chair Stephenson.
Madam Chair, Representative Brindley, I think you have a fair point that we could probably change in a future committee to similar to the fact that the PUC in its composition has members that are required to be, not a member of one party or to be a member of another party. I think we could probably work on that. I understand the solution you proposed would not have worked. I don't think, as I understand it from what I've read and understood. I know that might be inconsistent with what I said earlier, but I think we can't have legislators appointing voting members to these administrative boards. So I think just changing it to not legislators would not have solved that problem. But the underlying concern that you have about it being all one party, I think we could address in a future committee.
Madam Chair.
Representative New Brindley, I will note for members, we can go 10 minutes over, but we will vote no later than 2:40. Representative New Brindley.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Will you just clarify what you just said, that there's a problem having legislators appoint?
Yeah.
Or legislators appointed?
Chair Stephenson.
Yeah.
Because that would be
Madam Chair,
with how you amended it still.
no, the bill has the governor making the appointments of voting
For the
members.
voting members.
Yeah, my understanding is that the technical advice that we received is that we can't have legislators appointing voting members of the board.
Representative Brindley.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Moving on, this upper payment limit, there are clearly the goal, and I think we all appreciate the goal, right, is to control drug prices, but that's presumably we're trying to control drug prices for the end user, right? For patients who need these drugs. I am concerned with the language here that I'm not sure that we're actually accomplishing that. As I read the language, I'm very concerned. We're bypassing the insurer relationship. One of our testifiers mentioned that he needed this new drug, but that new one wasn't covered by the insurer. Well, that wouldn't solve his problem. That wouldn't solve this end user problem. So there's some questions there that I think are significant. I have one final question. I'm wondering, I didn't realize that we would have a testifier who had worked with Medicare at the federal level, but I'm wondering if Mr. Nelson could come back and answer a question for me. Is he still here?
Mr. Nelson,
or did he go?
Oh, there you go. Yes.
Excellent.
Go ahead, Representative.
Thank you. Mr. Nelson, I actually had this question in my notes before knowing you were going to be here, so I appreciate that coincidence. But I have a question on page 14 on the ERISA plans and the Medicare drug plans. So it says in here that on lines 1412 to 1415, the state must bill all payers no more than the upper payment limit. That's what they are allowed to bill. My question is, you know, on a personal level, I've worked a great deal with Medicare. And my question is, you know, Medicare seems to typically have a set payment schedule. And so could we run into a situation here where the state decides that the upper limit is $100, but the Medicare payment is $150? How would Medicare handle that situation? I mean, it seems like Medicare pays what they pay. They're going to pay the $150. And do we run into a situation where we are creating perhaps a conflict with kickbacks? I mean, what happens in that circumstance potentially?
Representative New Brinley, just for myself and maybe for the benefit of the other members of the committee, can you repeat which section you're referring to?
Yes.
Follow along.
I'm section 16, page 14, lines 12 through 15.
Thank you for that. Go ahead, Mr. Nelson.
Representative New, I believe that section you're referring to, I don't have it in front of me, I'm sorry, but I believe that section is related to the interest in applying this to ERISA plans and the fact that ERISA plans are generally preempt from state laws, and which is why the next section basically goes on to say that ERISA plans can participate if they want to. But nonetheless, we're charging where you can't charge the ERISA plans more. The provider can't do that. And so I found this curious, and I have not looked into the details of these paragraphs, and it's one of those things on my list of things to do regarding this bill, because it seems like a cute way to avoid ERISA preemption, and I'm not sure if this is really the appropriate way to do that. And I've spent a lot of time actually in my years thinking about ERISA preemption, because there's a lot of things I would like the state to do that ERISA preempts. And I appreciate the effort here, but I'm not sure if this actually works. And in terms of Medicare pricing, Medicare is going to pay the price that Medicare sets. And so in that instance, it's not, even though I would imagine that's true. I will admit, I worked in the insurance portion. I worked at CSIO. Medicare was not an entity that I worked with, so I'm not very familiar with the Medicare reimbursement. I've had to actually reject a lot of calls from consultants who want my advice because I did not have experience in Medicare reimbursement at CMS, but as I understand it, they're going to pay the set fee, and so this wouldn't impact it.
Thank you, Mr. Nelson. Representative New Brinley, any follow-up?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, I will just add, you know, I mean, we are running into this problem across the board, you know, when we hear bills in this committee. We have big bills. We try to fix a few things, but we know that we're always time limited. And but we're trying to do big things in ways that are not necessarily well thought through and have pretty significant issues that are going to cause problems down the road, especially when we know that this has already been done in 4 other states who can't manage to get this implemented. And while I know that you are brilliant, Mr. Chair, I have a hard time believing that somehow we are magically figuring it out right here, when just in this committee we can point to a number of problems that we're going to run into with this. I just think that a bill like this needs more time. I think it would be prudent. I think we would be wise to at least take a look at the transparency data that should theoretically be coming in. Frankly, it's very tardy. I'm not sure why we haven't seen that yet. We should have seen that months ago. But you know, we are writing pretty sweeping, broad legislation with clearly a lot of things that have not been thought out, when we should have data to help inform this. And right now, we haven't even laid our eyes on that data yet. And we should probably do that before moving forward. Thank you, Madam Chair.
All right, Representative Niska.
Thank you, Chair Katiza Watun and Representative Stephenson. You referenced some case law that limited Minnesota's ability to regulate patented drugs. I think the case you might be referring to is BIO versus the District of Columbia from the Federal Circuit in 2007. But I'm concerned about another case from the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals that struck down an almost identical law from Maryland, and where the state of Maryland had to pay the pharmaceutical industry's attorney's fees as a result of that. And I'm curious whether there is any factual distinction between the price gouging provisions in this bill and the Maryland bill that were struck down, or are we just gambling on the Eighth Circuit creating a circuit split with the Fourth Circuit in order to not just transfer money from the state treasury to the pharmaceutical industry?
Right. Mr. Chair, I will go to you. I just want to note that we have Lito Driscoll on to wrap things up, and we will be voting at 2:40.
Yeah,
Mr.
no,
Chair.
I'll be very brief and say, no, we are not gambling. We have learned from the experience in other states and modified this bill accordingly. I don't know that we have time to go into specifics of that now. I'm happy to talk with you on that offline.
Lito Driscoll.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I concur, Representative New Brindley. This is very big stuff that will affect Minnesotans, and I wish we had more time to do committee work in committees. Representative Stephenson, if an insurance company has a formulary plan with it, and they negotiate with pharmacies and others that are going to be providing those, and there are different prices that are set, but the whole package everybody agrees on, and then at some point in the future we go back and renegotiate that, in your bill, if the cost of a drug went from here to here on a full-scale renegotiation on all pharmaceuticals that are in there, to get a blend of what we're looking for, some may be higher, some may be lower, will they be subject to your bill here if they go ahead and agree to, say, move a blood pressure medication from $3 a month to, say, $5 a month, because it's what's been agreed upon in the formulary part with the drugstores and the providers of that medication? Will they immediately become subject to this as a result of a negotiation on a full, broad range of pharmaceuticals?
Chair Stevenson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Leo Driscoll, what I would point out is that the bill doesn't make anything per se a problem. What it says is that when you reach certain thresholds, either the board or the Attorney General can initiate additional investigations, can do additional actions, can consider things among multiple factors. So the answer to your question is it depends.
Madam Chair.
Representative O'Driscoll.
Well, that's kind of interesting because it sounds like there's going to be additional costs for people to go out and see what were the causes on these and where we were at. And I noticed that we don't have a fiscal note and attached with this. Do you know the status of the fiscal note, Representative Stephenson?
Chair Stevenson.
Madam Chair, Representative Driscoll, we've asked for one. It's not back yet. Of course, this committee, if it's going to bear the cost of it, we'll see the bill again.
Madam Chair?
Representative O'Driscoll.
So if insurance companies and/or others who are the payers on this have more regulation, could that lead to what happened to health insurance companies in the state of Minnesota, where they just choose not to do business in the state of Minnesota, thus limiting the ability for Minnesotans to be able to get the drugs and prescriptions that they currently have and enjoy?
Chair Stevenson.
Madam Chair, Representative Driscoll, the short answer is no. We hear conflicting arguments from prescription drug companies about this all the time. They want to have both sides of the argument. They want to say that prescription drugs are a national argument and we are a national drug that we can't go state by state because we have to offer it in all of the states. Oh, but if you do anything, then we won't play here. But we have to play here, but maybe we won't, but we have to. And they go back and forth, whatever is convenient. I don't believe that it's going to cause withdrawal in any significant form, no.
Representative O'Driscoll.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm specifically talking to generics, where any generic manufacturer can pick up a or offer a patent drug. That you may limit the options, and if you have 5 providers, that's great. If you have 1 provider, that's not so great for folks here in the state of Minnesota. More of a statement than anything. My final comment is, I think we're anticipating that this is going to be a problematic bill, and that's why Section 6 of the bill was included here today as well. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. And Chair Stevenson, quick wrap up.
Yeah, what I would say is, I was talking about generics too, Representative O'Driscoll. I disagree very strongly with the idea that this bill is not thought out or not prepared. This bill has been in development at this legislature for literally years. I personally have sat through, as the author of this bill, and I'm not the first person to bring either of these bills to this committee, and I personally have sat through many committee hearings on this bill. What we hear from the pharmaceutical companies and from people who are opposed to this bill all the time is there's got to be one more step, one more thing. We need one extra report. We need to know this a little bit more. We should devote a little bit more time. It's just a method of delay. People can't wait. Their prescription drug prices are too high. They need relief now, and we should act now. It's disingenuous to say that, well, this hasn't worked in any other state. It's because pharmaceutical companies have been delaying and obstructing these bills in every state they've been authored. And then to turn around and say, well, it's not working. Well, why Why do you suppose it is that it's taking a lot of time for these bills to work? Who would stand to benefit from that, and who has caused that to happen? Minnesotans can't wait. Please vote yes.
Right. With that, Chair Stephenson renews his motion that House File 17 as amended be recommended to be re-referred to the Judiciary, Finance, and Civil Law Committee. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, say nay. No. The motion prevails. House File 17 as amended is recommended to be re-referred to the Judiciary, Finance, and Civil Law Committee. And with that, members, this meeting is adjourned.